you would just be a puddle on the ground because you have to push against gravity just to sit up. You have to move through gravity just to walk. You can feel it on you, heavy. Sometimes I tell people, think about when you've been in a swimming pool and you get out of the swimming pool and you feel real heavy. In the pool, you're buoyant. You have a different sense of gravity when you're in the pool than when you get out of a pool. And that can just make you feel your body gets very heavy. That's how a baby must feel after they're born. They feel very, whoa, I got to move against this gravity, I have to push. Even lifting the head sometimes can be hard for an infant who's just born because they're not used to that gravity. But a lot of people have problems with their gravity sense. And there's lots of reasons for that, and there's lots of ways of dealing with that. But if your gravity sense is not working well, you don't feel very secure. You feel a little bit like you're always walking on ice, or like your lower brain unconsciously doesn't feel safe. You may be safe, but not feel safe. That's a very common feeling for somebody with anxiety. They may be safe, but not feel safe. So understanding how you can work with the gravity sense to make that work better is important. The other inner sense is the body and space sense. And you see this little picture of this child, it's like there are two ways that people feel with body and space differences. Sometimes they feel like they're floating, like they don't feel like they know where they are in space. They feel a little lost in space. We have a lot of words we talk about with this. We're just a spacey, right? We even use that word for somebody. They're a spacey person. And it's because their body in space, they might be clumsy, they might be like floating around, they just might not be grounded. And that body and space sense helps us to have that. Some people overcome issues with their body and space sense by pushing down, by overbearing, by getting very rough and pushing through things and being able to deal with things. Now, I had a lot of problems with my body and space sense when I was young. I would knock over my milk every single day at the dinner table because I couldn't navigate things in space or myself in space, and I would dart around and I would, be very, very quick. I thought if I did everything quickly enough, I would be able to deal with this body and space sense. But that is one way people deal with it when it's not working. The other way is to push down and to be overbearing, to bear onto their joints and push down very, very hard. These are the two senses that are these inner senses, which are extremely important with anxiety. And if you have weakness in either of these senses, you will, under certain triggers of trauma or uncertainty or other things, feel more anxious because your body's having more trouble getting the information, feeling safe in those senses that are so important to their feeling of safety. So the atypical development in anxiety, so the body space, we were just talking about the body space sense, that gives the brain a map of our body on the outside and on the inside. So sometimes people have this feeling of fear in the pit of their stomach, and they know it's coming from the pit of their stomach. But a person who has trouble with body space might not even know where it's coming from. They might even think it's coming from outside of themselves, to be honest. There's a really problem with understanding where they are and where other things, people, and even their own inner self is. These people may not know they're hungry. They may feel pain sometimes very strongly and other times not at all. These things all are going to be seen with somebody who has atypical body space sense. Generalized, from my experience, and I say this pretty strongly, generalized anxiety almost always is accompanied with body space sense problems. You do not know where you are in space. Your lower brain is always worried, apprehensive, and concerned. Now, that doesn't mean you didn't have a trauma or something else to make this worse, but generalized anxiety means that there isn't a particular reason for that anxiety. It's just hanging on and around you all the time. And that feeling is usually very often your lower brain going, where are you in space? It can also bring nightmares. It can also make tossing and turning in bed. It can do all kinds of things that go with the idea of being anxious and being fearful. So now we're going to talk a little bit about reflexes. Reflexes are the very early way that the motor system learns how to work. When a baby's born, they just kind of have reflexive movement, and they have all other kind of movement that's very disorganized and very inefficient. Maturation, and development is made for us to get more efficient with the way we use our bodies. So the reflexes are involuntary muscle responses to sensory stimuli. So you see in the picture that foot is in a Babinski response, which the big toe is up and the other toes, so it kind of fans up, and the person is touching the bottom of the foot with an instrument. You can use your finger as well, but that shows that that is very strong motor reaction. Now, usually the Babinski is inhibited in the baby about 1 year, 1.5 years old. So having an adult have a Babinski response can tell you a couple things. May mean something very serious, or it may just mean it never got totally integrated to start with, and there might be problems with stability and other things. So really, primary reflexes are nature's gifts to help development and protection. We really are made for developing. We're here to develop, I think. That's my own philosophy of life, is that we are to bring out who we really are and to develop ourselves in a way that will help ourselves and others. So primary reflexes begin with what we call the differentiation of response of the motor system. In other words, when this baby turns their head, the side away from the way the baby's turning, you'll see, is bent and contracted. This is an automatic response. The other side extends. So the one side's straight, the other side's bent. This is called the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. Baby isn't thinking to do that. It's just we are designed to have these motor responses, these primitive or primary reflexes right at the beginning. Usually ATNR is inhibited by about 3 to 4 months. It's integrated later. It's probably, sometimes we see it all the way until 9 years of age and still be within typical. So what are these primary primitive reflexes? They are giving way, they give way to volitional or voluntary movement and modulation, regulation through inhibition and integration. So we talked about the lower brain, and here you see it in purple. And then we talked about the midbrain, which I didn't color in this one, but you can see it's a little outlined in the center there. And then you can see these stripes. These stripes are the sensory motor part of the cortex. They're the part that deal with the experiences that make it through all the buffering of the spine and the lower brain and the midbrain, and it gets up, it gets processed and organized and decided upon in the cerebellum, or in the cortex, in the motor and sensory cortices, if you want to be proper. We feel feelings, so our lower brain and body interact together, and they give that information to the upper brain, all right? And there are some real universal feelings that people have, and fear is one of the universal. But everybody on earth feels some sort of fear, okay, at some time in their life. That's pretty much a universal. And one of the things that I like to bring up during this is there are reflexes, and there are also responses. Responses are lower level. Before you even have a motor system, when you're an embryo, you're not even really moving yet, you are already developing tissue responses that are in the body. And fear paralysis response is one of those. And when you have fear paralysis response active in your system, it can trigger fear and freezing more often. Some people deal with fear by running away. Some deal with fear by fighting. Some people deal with fear by freezing, okay? And freezing is something we see, and you will see that you may freeze, you might flee, but the person who has fear paralysis response tends to freeze. And they can freeze even when you're talking to them if something comes up or you're having a traumatic response. the people with fear paralysis tend to be overly bonded or underly bonded with their family and friends, and they tend to be either clingy or dismissive. So there's like two ends to a spectrum. With most reflexes, you have different spectrums. So this is like clingy or like I don't care about you at all. Okay, and both of those are kind of how our tissues are responding to the situation and informing our brain of what we feel. So there's lots of reasons why reflexes might be developed, and we don't have time to go through all these things. We talked a little bit about them, but they can be physical, mental, emotional, and even spiritual, I believe. They can be even genetic. There can be things that that go through generations, even, we found. So there are many types of trauma that can interfere with development, interfere with that developmental life called spiral of development. Lack of developmental opportunities is one of those. So here's you get a scan that we see here, and in utero stress is one. Now, this is interesting to me because my granddaughter, she was, every single scan had that hand up and right on her face in every single position and all throughout her time in utero. It turned out she was all tangled up in her cord. So she had quite a bit of problems getting born. She had to end up being a C-section. I kind of predicted that because I figured that she was tangled in her cord and she really needed more help than what she got with that. But we have been working with her ever since because that did create a different set of circumstances for her to have to deal with. But they're not impossible, and it's not a tragedy. We just start with where we are. You can only start with where you are. That's what I always say in my programs. You can't will yourself out of something. Usually you have to start. We have a good, honest appreciation of where you are, and it's okay. We can always develop forward, and that's what's important. We're given a treasure chest of things to be able to work with. So some of the birth differences that are important are births can be too fast, too slow. They can be breech, sunny side up, which means your face the other way. Forceps birth, suction birth, C-section birth, or cord issues in birth. I didn't put on here placenta differences, but that also could be a problem. After birth, you can have accidents, lack of bonding, a medical emergency, prematurity. These are all going to be things that change your developmental thing. Now, some of them may be small. They may not even be a big deal. We're very resilient in our development, but they can start they can start a trigger that can then create another trauma later or relate to another trauma later in life. So these things can piggyback on each other. They can group up, and a few little things can become a big thing. It's always better to know this and be able to work on the development of each of these areas if possible. There's traumas in later life. Either just too much work, some violence in your life. Accidents are very common. Misuse of any kind is going to be a traumatic experience, which some people are very resilient to. Other people are not. Why are some resilient and some not? Well, I would guess they have a better neurodevelopmental system already in place, so they can come back from trauma a lot easier. So here we do have developmental and biological resources. And reflexes and our sensory system and our motor system is just the beginning of what we have to work with. So this is one of the charts I made that just show we have inner resources of all the things that our body can do. We have an outer environment that we have some control over often. And when we don't, we have ways we can deal with that. We have also what I call developmental resources, which include our reflexes, instincts, biological function, our senses, including our inner senses, and our motor system. Now we're going to look at vagus nerve, because vagus nerve is one of the quickest ways to find out whether a person has some issues with calming their system down. So people can be anxious and fearful. Everybody's anxious and fearful once in a while. The thing is, can you change gears? Can you calm down? Can you change the channel, I call it? Can you do it? Well, this is the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in your body, and it goes all the way down your throat, well, through your tongue, back to your tongue, your throat, your heart, your stomach, all the way down to your rectum. And when someone's full of fear, somebody's having an aha movement. Good. Yes, that's exactly right. Your throat gets dry and tight, your heart starts beating, your stomach gets all mushy, and if you really do, you have to go to the bathroom, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to avoid myself. This is how frightened we can be because that nerve is in charge of that. Now, that nerve, what that does is it's the brake on our sympathetic response. A sympathetic response is very excited, right? That's the fear. Woo! The vagus nerve's job is to go, no, it's okay, I got it. It's okay, calm down. And by the way, you can have a vagus nerve that's too strong too and never feel anything, by the way. It goes the other direction as well. But most of the time we see people who have trouble calming down. That's the most common way we see the vagus nerve having a problem. Now, let's see how we can check this, because this is something I think was so cool, and I don't think many people know it. So we're going to show you. If you have someone open their mouth and say, you see that little uvula in the back of the throat there? That little thing hanging down, you see how it's being pulled to the side? As a matter of fact, you can kind of see the structures on that side are pulled tight on that one side. Now this is an extreme. I've seen that uvula all the way up in the top of the side of the top of the roof of the mouth because it's pulled so much to the side. Now there's a lot of things we can talk about this. I think this is usually related to the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, but it affects how the vagus nerve is functioning. And if the vagus nerve, this is actually a test that doctors use to see if your vagus nerve is functioning, okay? That's when they look in your throat. They're looking for that, all right? And if it's hanging straight down, they're not too worried because they figure your vagus nerve's working pretty well. If it's pulled to the side, it's not. So here's the vagus nerve connection. I talked about where it goes. It goes in the brain, goes down the back of your tongue, down into your throat, and that doesn't show here too much, a little bit. And then it goes down into all these areas. You can see how important it is to your function. So if you're upset and you can't, if you're frightened a lot, you can't digest food because the vagus nerve helps to the body to decide what enzymes. So that's why when you're upset, you can't eat very well. You get indigestion, and then you're not digesting food well. It affects your intestines, how well you're assimilating your food, your kidneys, your spleen, your liver, all those things that are helping you to assimilate food, to get rid of waste. That's not happening when you're upset, okay? And that doesn't include the adrenal system, which is also involved. So I'm going to show you a quick activity that we're going to do that has to do with the vagus nerve stimulation. It says stimulation because that's what you want. You want a vagus nerve that's going to calm everybody down, be the guy. These points that you see here, these are all the vagus nerve stimulation. So if you want to do this, you can hold your fingers, a couple fingers up on the top of your head, right at the crown of your head, and you're just going to do little circles, okay? Just little circles up there, and you can go either way or both ways, and just let that feel good. Okay, now you're going to go down to what we would call the third eye. These are all points of the vagus nerves can be affected. Now you're going to go down to under the nose. Now you're going to go to the chin. I'm already feeling better. I can feel my body relaxing. Now you're going to put your fingers on either side of your sternum, right under your breastbone, and you're going to just jiggle down as far as you can, comfortably go. Just jiggle down a couple times. And you can go right below the sternum. And then right below the navel. And some people some of these points are more important than others. So some people like, oh my gosh, that one right under my chin, that is the one, man. That is just the one that I need, right? And so some people stop there. Every one of these, I found somebody who that's their point, the most important point for them, and they'll actually stay there. A lot of women like the one along the breast bone the most. It seems to help the thyroid and other things that women, and I think it has to do with kidney energy too. So under trauma, reflexes to the rescue. Our reflexes will come out of integration if there's enough trauma. They feel like they must be there to help because they're there to help you be safe. And so although they're in integration and you have voluntary movement, when you are under enough trauma, your voluntary movement will be leaving you. As a matter of fact, I always tell people, what's the thing you think of a person who's in the most mental, physical trauma? What are they going to be? Usually they're in a fetal position, right? They're like, that's it, man. That's a reflex. It's a reflex to go into that position for protection. And it's our last ditch trying to stay alive, all right? So our resources can master our lower brain impulses. In other words, sometimes we think of our lower brain as just torturing us with all this, warning, warning, warning all the time. Well, why is it doing that? It's usually because it's not very well organized. And working with the reflexes, working with your sensory motor system can help to calm the beast down there in the bottom part of the brain. Okay. So there are three phases of easing trauma. You want to make before traumas, you want to make a resilient system if you can. During a trauma, you just need to deal with first aid and the very most practical things. Then after the trauma, you want to help restore the system to its original way and not let the trauma continue to affect the person. So regulating motor abilities teaches us to regulate our feelings. All right. Well, I was going to talk a little bit about I'm going to mention the rhythmic movement groups. Rhythm, rocking, and toning are what help a lot of times help our tissues, our body to relax. When you want a baby to relax and go to sleep, you rock the baby. You just you pat the baby's back. You're being rhythmic, you are rocking, you are toning by humming, by singing. That's exactly what you're doing. You're helping the baby's system relax. But it doesn't work just with babies. It works with everybody. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of older people like rocking chairs for that same idea. They listen to music and rocking, and maybe they hum, and that is very, very organizing to the system, right? But sometimes we forget about these tools. We're in the middle of life, but they're good all the time. So, importance of a sensory motor reflex health. It helps with your sleeping, which is very important. If you're fearful and anxious, very hard to sleep. Eating, digestion, same thing. Breathing will be involved, especially if you have fear. If the vagus nerve is not working, goes into the lungs, you're going to have trouble breathing, and a lot of reflexes are involved with that. Gross motor development may be affected. You might have tics, or if you're trembling, fear itself can become just a constant tremble. Audiovisual attention, because it's hard to attend when your brain is worried about really basic stuff. Tactile emotional regulation, the feelings of things. Memory and mental processing, again, hard to have energy to do a lot of learning, memory, and mental things when your brain is taken up with anxiety, fear, and other ideas and lower brain concerns. 3D, 2D spatial processing. So here's some of the concerns we see related to reflex work. Attention problems, perfectionism, anxiety, passivity, clumsiness, phobias, boundary issues, bonding, procrastination, lack of ability to sustain, motor issues, lacking joy and peace, aimlessness, and aggression. So what do we do about this? I always say behavior is communication. You can see what people are feeling and thinking often through their behavior. Now, it may not be the behavior you want to see. It may not even be the behavior you want to do, but it's telling you something. It's a message. So how are we going to decode the messages? We're going to stay in our safety challenge place as we're working on our sensory motor system, which means we're going to make sure that every challenge we have is not too much. Sometimes people are in a traumatic state and then they try to do great challenges and it just makes things worse. So I want everybody to start thinking developmentally, and other options for action is training, reflex checks and programs, sponsorships of programs in your area.